Great. So I think to tell my long story is I grew up on Long Island in New York in the 90s, 80s and 90s. I think just lived a pretty normal suburban lifestyle back then. My dad was a mailman. Of course, I played lacrosse, had lots of friends, just had a pretty good childhood. Really fell in love with computers pretty early, actually. Like in the third grade or so, there was a program called Lego Logo, which was literally like today you would think of them as Lego Mindstorms, but back then it was like much cruder version of these Legos that you could program with a language called Logo, and the robot would like plug into the back of the computer like a serial port or yeah, I think it was like a serial port in the back. And so you write some code and like make this robot move around. And so I was exposed to that in the third grade. Had also had two older sisters, and so as a result, had an Atari, had an NES. Was just all of this was pretty new, and I was pretty young and just like highly exposed to it. And so just really fell in love with computers early. Like by the time I was 12, probably fell in love with computers, which has always been my life and normal to me. But by now, as I'm older, realize how lucky I am in many ways to have found what I loved as a child, essentially.
Did
Got my
you,
first, yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but did you have anyone else around you at that time that was also interested in computers, like whether it was family or friends or, even people that maybe you were able to meet through the internet or anything? Or was it sort of like a solo interest where you just took up this interest in computers and were kind of going down that path on your own?
Yeah, it was so early, It was like the first Mac and the Commodore 64. And so there were like kids in the neighborhoods who had them, but all we did was play games on them. It was like, again, around NES or maybe even slightly before it. So like lots of kids in the neighborhood. I can't imagine, I don't know how, I must have been like 6 years old, So then like you're looking at like the 9-year-old who's like showing you Leisure Suit Larry on the, on the Nintendo 64 or something. And so there was like a community of people who played games, and actually like all the software, and partially it was because I was a kid, but also like software was on floppy disks and was just pirated. And so you like knew everyone in the neighborhood who had like a Commodore 64, and then you'd like swap games and swap all your swap all the programs and stuff. And so there was like that kind of very early like sneaker net culture happening. None of my close friends certainly would play tons of video games. My close friends were into video games. Some of them were like in that Lego Logo, and some of the early opportunities I had in school because it was like for people who excelled in math in the third grade, and so like some of my friends were also like the math kids. But really, like by the time I got my first PC, which was when I was 16, and the other thing I'll say is like my dad being a mailman and like extremely blue collar upbringing, he didn't know anything about any of this stuff, except that he had some hunch that was important and that like his kids should have them. And so, for my 16th birthday, which would have been like, my sisters had a sweet 16, but my equivalent was like, I got a computer. And that was kind of the first time I met others online. I mean, kind of very, very early on, very briefly through BBSs. So it was like still kind of people in the neighborhood or like people in my county who are all logging into the same BBS, and we have access to kind of proto email and message boards and these kinds of things. But really it was like, I think I got Prodigy was my first like real online service on a 386 PC with like a 14.4 modem. That's how I got started in this stuff. And that was like when I truly just fell in love. I like started to write like a little bit of code in BASIC. I was in chat rooms, and a lot of the stuff that like is totally normal and everyone grows up with today was like I was like discovering chat rooms and meeting people from other countries who were then like helping with me with some of the code I was working on. That was like my early upbringing, and just led me right from early childhood through high school, where I was like there weren't a lot of programming courses available to high school kids at the time, but I was like in the one or two classes at school, and then just like knew I was going to go do computer science. And I think I went to college in 1997, and so .com boom was kind of happening, and it was like just to at least a certain group of people so clear that like computers were going to take over, and so it was like just such an easy decision to go do computer science. And so did computer science at the State University of New York at Albany. So SUNY Albany, got my computer science degree. While I was there, started, my kind of computer science degree, my computer science education was, I'm just not super into programming. I never really was. I didn't really quite understand that at the time. And so, I struggled through a lot of the programming courses or had partners, but had really fallen in love with Linux, which was probably pretty new around the time. I remember installing the first Linux distribution on like 13 floppy disks from like some other freshman who like taught me about Linux. And then so in that 4-year experience, I actually wound up starting a small company selling firewalls to the local businesses in Albany, New York. And what had happened was broadband had just finally come out, and Albany was like a test city, so they got it a little bit earlier. And so now all of a sudden, every law firm was online, every accounting firm was online, early in Albany compared to the rest of the states even. And so then I started selling them firewalls. And then from that firewall business, I got recruited to go to grad school at Dartmouth from a top computer security professor at the time. And so went to Dartmouth, had actually started Dartmouth as a researcher. And so he brought me into his team. He's like, oh, I see the work you're doing. It's super cool. Come be a researcher on my team. So I started as a researcher, got the experience of like having a job, getting paid, buying a car, all that stuff. And then he asked me to come on as his PhD student. And so I spent 2 years in the PhD program, decided it wasn't for me. It was like not really what I wanted to be doing with my life. I like much preferred working. And so left the PhD program back into a different research institute at Dartmouth for a while. And so now we're getting closer to modern history. One of the teams I got put on there was the simulations team. And so this is like right after 9/11, and all of this funding goes into DHS, and then DHS like funding all these university research groups. And so I wound up on the simulation team where we used Unreal Engine to simulate plane crashes and the emergency response to plane crashes. And I did that for a few years. And it was super cool. It was fun. I was like in gaming, kind of, I was traveling all around the world, meeting firefighters and, emergency management people, and was starting to build a little expertise in there. And actually, we wrote papers. It was cool. It was very early stuff, and it was cool to have firefighters like playing these triage games where they would go and triage or take care of these virtual people. From there, I had like my own project there where I did the same thing inside of Second Life. And so Second Life was a brand new virtual world at the time, and it had two like really defining characteristics. One was that it was just like an open world. You bought a plot of land, and then within the game, you had the tools to build things. And then the second defining factor is it had a virtual currency that had an exchange that traded, and it was not crypto, but it was proto crypto, like it was totally a digital currency that you could use in this world and sell otherwise. And so I kind of built the same thing in Second Life.
Same thing as in like what you were doing professionally, you started to do within Second Life?
Yeah, that's right. So actually, I bought a plot of land. I built Hanover, New Hampshire, which is where Dartmouth is located. And then we started doing some simulation work inside of Second Life. And at the very same time, like the world discovered Second Life. And so, I mean, for people who are old enough, they'll remember there was this boom, and Second Life was like on television and then on the cover of magazines and all of that stuff. Well, I was very, very early. And so even though I was working at this research institute, so many people, and then I had this very public project in Second Life that I was showing people. I got tons of consulting offers to do all of the things people wanted to do in virtual worlds. This is kind of the second virtual world cycle. There was a VRML movement in the late 90s, and then there was Second Life, and now, of course, we're on to Meta versus Apple and their much deeper stuff. But this is a second lead.
Were you involved in the first one at all, or Second Life was your first foray?
Right. In the first one, I was used it a little bit, used these apps like Palace or these VRML apps that were pretty bad. But professionally, I just wasn't old enough. It was in fact, I think these things happen every 15 years or something, because then 10 or 15 years, because then maybe 10 years later it happened Second Life. and then that went dark. And then 10 years later, like, Meta came out with Oculus, or Oculus came out with it. And so there's like a cycle here that's happening in the virtual worlds universe. Um, but through this Second Life, so I wanted to, I was a researcher, and then I was doing nights and weekends, like building all these consulting projects in Second Life. And then I realized that I just liked it better, and it was what I wanted to do. And so quickly research university, just had like a one person Second Life startup, consultancy. Got approached by some friends who were building something much bigger and had like just raised $10 million from Comcast. And they said like, hey, come on and be, well, it was like an acqui-hire for a very small amount because it was all very new. But like, come be our creative director. And then so spent a bunch of years at the Electric Sheep Company as ultimately their chief creative officer. And the Electric Sheep Company is one of the driving factors behind the Second Life hype in the time. What we were really good at was finding companies. Sometimes there were schools, but most of it was companies and their innovation budgets. And they were hearing about Second Life and they were wanting to try it. We were like bringing them in and creating these experiences for people. Get tons of press at the time for those companies, and just kind of do that. It was like, maybe one way to look at it was like advert gaming. We'd build these little gaming experiences, but they were around like a TV show like The L Word, or a movie like Smoking Aces. And so we won 2 Emmys at the Electric Sheep Company. I won one for some work I did on The L Word, and then we won as a studio for some work we did with MTV's Virtual Laguna Beach. But it was clear that like the technology was not quite ready for virtual worlds, and everything, after we wound up having our crowning achievement was 2 episodes on CSI New York, when CSI New York was the most popular show on television. And the murder happened, and the only clue was in Second Life. And so on television, they go into Second Life, and then it was our team. We had a machinima crew very early on. We had like a professional machinima crew who shot like one of the first HD machinimas in Second Life, and that was shown on television. And then there was a cliffhanger. They didn't actually solve the mystery, and then at the end they would drive. They had commercials, and it was like a whole thing. They drove people from watching television into the Second Life experience to solve the murder for themselves. And then there was a follow-up episode where they solved the murder using our team and our machinima. But it was kind of that moment which was like so amazing. I was having on the biggest show in television, and we had the full support of CBS, and it was like when all of the cracks showed, because like 1 million people hit the website that night, and then like 500,000 of them downloaded the app, and then like 250,000 of them could even install the app, like had the system requirements, and then like 100,000 of those people got it installed, but like really wasn't powerful enough to have a good experience. And like when we trickled it down from like the 10 million people who watched that television show, we wound up with like 25,000 people inside of Second Life. And a lot of it was just like the hardware requirements and the challenges and the software and everything in between. And then for the Electric Sheep Company, it was basically down only from them. We made some social games. We tried some other stuff. A lot of the industry had seen what happened, and so less money was flowing through Second Life at the time. And then around the same time, the iPhone just came out, and like I just knew that was like the next thing I wanted to do. The very first version of the iPhone didn't even have an SDK, but like as soon as they announced the SDK, I like gracefully left the Electric Sheep Company and just started doing some game design consulting for iOS apps around that time. And so basically it was like my expertise at that point had been gaming, and I won a couple of Emmys, and people did respect that. And then they were building social apps, and they wanted to gamify them. And so that was like my early wedge. Was like I started gamifying. Pop the Table was one of the apps. GroupMe was another one I worked on. And then really rolled that into like maybe 10 or 15 year career in consumer internet, mobile apps, social, e-commerce, just the data science. A couple of those companies sold along the way. I was usually like a founder or a first employee, head of product type. And so that brings us maybe to the modern era, which is during COVID, I was working at a startup studio. I was the head of product of the startup studio, and we were cranking 2 startups each year. And I would be the head of product for those startups for 12 months, and then they would graduate and hire their own head of product. And so in some ways it was really cool because it was like two different things a year. I was there for 4 or 5 years. And then we really settled into like consumer packaged goods. And I became like this expert on Shopify, which was like not super exciting to me. I spent a lot of my time trying to get 1% more people to like click the buy button, and just knew it was like that was it. The studio had fallen into uh, that niche. That niche wasn't for me,
Mm.
and so I just left no plans. It was COVID. We couldn't leave our houses or anything. I wound up being fortunate that I had an art studio around in the times of COVID. And so I was living in Queens, in Long Island City, and then I had a separate art studio that was like 5 blocks away, but it was a totally separate building across from like a little park. And and in New York, like during COVID, and especially the early part, was like just it was just like a lot of fear, and you were like not allowed to go outside, and even if you had to like go walk your dog, you felt like you were exposing yourself to death. So it was like the city was totally dead. But I was able to like walk to my art studio, where it was like one of these studios where there were probably 20 spaces and 20 different artists rented the spaces at very pre-COVID prices. Um, like two or three would venture into the art studio during COVID, and so so I had this space. I had a couple of people around me, and I was able to like get outside, and I did a lot of painting. And then while I was painting, I started thinking about crypto. Um, I do have a longer history in crypto, which is like I mined Bitcoin very early on, and then decided like there were no jobs in Bitcoin for me, and then I got involved in CryptoKitties when that first came out, and got super excited about Ethereum. But still, at the time, there were not a lot of like app designers and app developers being hired. Um, so I've always kind of had crypto in the back of my mind, and so here I am in COVID painting. I started thinking about like authenticating my paintings and using crypto to authenticate paintings, and I had seen some stuff online about that, and so that really put me down like this NFT rabbit hole, which led me very quickly to NBA Top Shot, which was kind of my first, I think, consumer grade experience in crypto. And I remember like playing Top Shot that day and thinking like, oh, great, this space is now ready for people with skills like mine, and I'm ready to like build crypto stuff. And so totally enamored by NFTs at large, NBA Top Shot, which are these trading card NFTs. Start going into like NFT art because obviously I'm also making art and all of the things. And then I really start tweeting a lot about it. Again, I'm like unemployed, chilling in my art studio, painting and tweeting about NFTs constantly. And a friend who was working at Tezos reached out to me and was like, "Hey man, we're building NFTs here. I know you have like this background in art, music, fashion. Like we want to bring that stuff to the Tezos chain. You should come and talk to us." And so I wound up in early 2021 joining Tezos. It was TQ Tezos, which was one of the big development studios that was funded by the Tezos Foundation. And I was right there at the end when they were just finishing the NFT specs. So I got to see like the early Tezos NFT specs, and then worked on the first minting software called Open Minter. And actually, as a result, because I was, kind of like the only product guy on an engineering team building NFT minting, it had only ever been used on testnet. And so like we knew it worked. We were like getting ready to release it. And then I asked like, "Hey, has anyone ever tried this on mainnet?" And the answer was no. And so as a result, I actually have minted the first artwork on the Tezos blockchain. So I was in my art studio still, working remotely, took a picture of the painting that I was working on, and then minted that to Tezos, and that's the first NFT on Tezos.
Nice.
Yeah. So got it. Was pretty involved early, at least early for me in those days, in like Tezos art scene and Hicket Nunk and all of that stuff. And eventually down the line, TQ Tezos lost their funding from the foundation due to some dispute I don't even really know the details of. And so like everyone in the TQ Tezos orbit got like sucked up by another team in the universe. And then I just decided to like go try something else. So left Tezos. It was also like the first time I like discovered Ethereum, and so it's like here I am. I'm like I know about crypto early on Bitcoin. Had like played with CryptoKitties. Had found NBA Top Shot, which is the Flow blockchain. I started working on Tezos. And then kind of coming out of all of this stuff, it was like I really found the culture and what was happening on Ethereum. And I think like the first thing I did was join FWB. I wound up actually like participating in the ENS airdrop and then turning that airdrop immediately into FWB tokens and then joined my first DAO. And just met a lot, that early FWB crew of like creative technologists, artists. It was really cool. Met a bunch of them in real life. Had moved to Miami. There was like a good FWB scene in Miami. Professionally, went back to data science, and so this was like actually peak bull market. And I had just done all this NFT work for Tezos, and NFTs were so super hot. And literally, like on my last day of being at Tezos and announcing it, it was like I had like 3 or 4 job offers by the end of that day, and it proved to be true, but I just felt like, oh, these are not the right people in the space. These entrepreneurs have a lot of money, but they don't believe in what's really happening here. It's a lot of like people trying to sugarcoat, get rich quick. And so I was like, something I think is wrong here. I'm going to go take a break. Helped a friend who was building a data science company. So, I'm doing data science professionally, but then nights and weekends was all crypto, NFTs, DAOs. I found Nouns DAO. Um, eventually found Farcaster even. But I'll just tell you, the final part of the story is that when FTX crashed and the market came down, I like I was just jonesing to get back into the space, and I had known that like all of the comparable Barkers and all the people who were there for the wrong reasons would be gone. And sure enough, like especially this late from them, it's like none of them are still around. And then I just wanted to be like a bear market builder. Like I believe in the tech, I believe in the ethos. I was happy that people would be gone. And then around similar, it's all happened around the time of discovering Farcaster, which was about 3 years ago now. And that's it. Just building through the bear market and kind of seeing some of the fruits right now as things come around.
That's awesome that, especially, I mean, first of all, the whole story is great and appreciate you sharing, but recently speaking, like leaving, most people, you get 3 or 4 jobs after leaving one and you're pretty inclined to take one, but to sort of recognize like these people aren't quite right for me, what they're doing doesn't seem quite right, and everything just feels kind of crazy right now. I'm going to dip out, like to do that at the peak of the market and then wait for things to crash down and say, okay, now I'm interested again. It's like very unusual, I think, for most people, when obviously the attention is, most people want to pay attention when everyone else is paying attention and don't want to when no one else is, but you're sort of the opposite of that. And I feel like it's helpful for the approach that you have to things, which is like you just want to build. You're not trying to like get involved in the craziness of it. So
yeah, and I
it's really interesting.
feel a little bit more prepared for the oncoming crazy than I was then. And so it was almost like one of those moments where I couldn't even tell what was real or not, or like these entrepreneurs had just raised so much money and they were talking about like, yeah, we're gonna do this thing with Little Baby and Dunkin' Donuts, and I'm like, this is just so weird. like how did you just raise so much money, whereas like, now I'm probably like, I say that, right? Like I mean, this is just a true story. I left during the bull and joined, and actually like I was working at this data science company, which was a friend's company. And so I had basically told her like, hey, like she knew the whole time, like, okay, cool. You're going to go back to crypto eventually, right? Like, yeah, because I love crypto and we talked a lot about crypto. And so when the time was right, it was like, hey, I'm going to go do this. And she was very supportive. But I didn't really have a ton of connections or anything in crypto. And so I wound up like, well, at that point I had like moved from NFTs to DAOs and had like really fallen in love with DAOs. This is actually pre-starting Purple, but I really loved FWB and Nouns and Little Nouns, and was like super interested in the DAO space, super interested in the vision for DAOs, especially 3 years ago. And so just kind of did my Web2 networking, asked my friends who are investors and who'll do this and that. And then one of my friends introduced me to Alex from Charmverse, who's the founder of Charmverse, and we just like hit it off and just decided to build Charmverse together. And so that was the beginning of our journey, was building Charmverse as a DAO operations platform. And so a lot of people thought of it as like a Notion for crypto, and it's very Notion-like, but it's token gated and you can have bounties and proposals. Started working on that. Through that kind of work, just also got like sucked into the Optimism ecosystem. and became a citizen, so started voting on retro funding and that stuff. And then Optimism selected Charmverse as a grants platform for their proactive grants. And so we didn't even really know them. It kind of came out of the blue. We get this email. It's like, hey, the Optimism Grants Council wants to use Charmverse, but would you guys be down to make these few changes? And we did. We jumped on, found out their needs, and made a couple of changes to the way proposals work so they could also function as grants. And then I would say like hit product market fit in grants, which is there's not a lot of grants customers, but a lot of big grants customers were or are still using Charmverse, like Optimism and Cello and Tyco and Game7, all these kind of big L2s. Polygon had a big program with Charmverse. Um, and through that process, like learned a ton about DAOs, building for the DAOs community. We still have DAOs using Charmverse, building for like the grants community, becoming like basically I feel very knowledgeable about grants and how they work in crypto and all the different ways people do it. And then retro funding, which is just a different way to do grants. And then just participating in some of these other events like rounds. Started thinking about like how do we do perpetual funding for developers. And so there's a lot of different ways to slice this, but one, it's like, grants are great. Everyone loves grants. You apply for the grant, but there's so much about the process that's painful. Like one, finding a grant is pretty painful, and it's kind of could be a full-time job. Then you fill out these long applications, and then it sometimes can be like a multi-week process with multiple teams evaluating it. And then you maybe or maybe don't win the grant, but maybe you win the grant, and there's like a 1-year lockup on it. And there's just all of these inefficiencies for the teams winning grants, but then also for the grant program, it's very leaky, fund a lot of stuff. Not all of it turns out. And so started thinking about like how do we make a second product at Charmverse that could sort of fill this niche where it's like, maybe you're DevRel, and on one hand you have hackathons, which are really fun. There's a lot of energy, but then as soon as the hackathon's over, everyone goes back to base. Or you have an expensive grants program, or you're funding some party at ETH Denver that probably has very bad ROI. And so, we started thinking about those people and the grants programs, and like, how can we build something that rewards developers for building on your chain or your protocol, which is what the chains and protocols really want, in a sustainable way, so that like the payments are coming, or at least you're being rewarded for your efforts above and beyond, your job or however else you make money. So from there, we built the Scout game, which launched a couple of months ago, which is it is fantasy sports for open source developers. It's kind of the easiest way to describe it. And so as a player, you're a scout. You're buying a bunch of developer cards. All the developers opt in to play the game. You buy their cards, and then they score just by contributing to open source repos in their kind of normal, average, everyday work. And so we are monitoring everything that's happening on GitHub. And then as developers are like contributing to major crypto projects, and in fact, they're all like approved crypto projects. And we know these are like legitimate projects you're scoring against. The developers score points, and then the scouts who own their cards score points. And it's all like a point-based economy right now, but we do have an airdrop coming soon. And so this will all be a game that you play for the Scout token.
How does the point system actually work? Is that something that you guys are sort of controlling allocation of points based on something that's doesn't need to be sort of like custom for every contribution? There's like some rules that are sort of generally applicable.
Yeah, there's some pretty basic rules. One, it's like if you have a commit, you get one gem, 1 point. Commit's pretty low barrier to entry. It's gameable in a lot of ways. We have a lot of trust in the repos we've chosen, so that's one level of spam detection. But yeah, you get 1 point for just having a commit. You get 2 points for having a pull request and then approving your own pull request. And so again, we want to reward you for doing the work. And there's a lot of developers who work like this, a one-man team, still use best practices, have a PR and then close it. But then we give you 10 points if it's peer reviewed. And so if someone else has reviewed the pull requests, we'll give you 10 points because then it's a better way of engineering, and we have a little bit more confidence that you're not gaming it. And then if you get 3 PRs in a week, you get 30 points. Just like we call it a streak, and you get like a badge, and you get 30 points. So that's roughly how it works.
And are you guys adding projects that sort of like, rise above a certain threshold over time, basically?
Yeah, we're like constantly adding projects, and so a lot of it is currently like we're curating the projects. And so I'll just say the first like 1,000 repos came from the Electric Capital report and all the great work they've done there, and they've cataloged all of the major crypto repos. So we have all of those, and then we have a bunch of partners like Celo is a great partner of ours who will like bring us great projects in the Celo ecosystem. So we're like constantly adding those, and then I see stuff happening in Farcaster, so I'm adding the Farcaster projects that are relevant. And so what I want is like a large group of repos that we have some faith and trust around, that people won't just straight game them. And then this way, tons of developers can get rewarded, even if it's like you're a solo developer working on a frame in Farcaster, but it's open source. Like I want to figure out a way to like make sure you get tokens.
Yeah, that's it's really interesting. I did not expect that you would have that many repos already, but it makes sense you're able to leverage existing work of like Electric Capital and some others and get some partners to bring you in, like sort of build the system for repeatedly adding like pretty verifiably or high degree of certainty high quality repos. And it's actually really interesting. Like are there I have a couple questions, but is there anything like what you're doing that exists?
There are like bounty. I think bounty program. Let me just talk about a separate part of this, and then I'll bring this back.
Sure.
Which is like then what actually has been working like better than I expected. It's like one of these things you put on the whiteboard and it like actually works. Is that we wound up having a bunch of partners who come in and they sponsor specific repos. And so like if you contribute a PR to the Glow wallet repo, Celo gives you anywhere between 250 USDC and 750 USDC, depending on like they have all of their issues tagged. And so if you do like a really hard one, you get 750 USDC. So that's like really so now the developers on our platform are like playing for points, which they know will turn to tokens, but they also literally are getting paid in USDC or native tokens for working on these partner projects. And that's been super interesting because when we meet DevRels, they're just looking for more tools. Like DevRels don't have enough tools. They're trying to bring developers to the platform or the protocol, and again, they have a playbook that's like a 2 or 3 years old now. And so, yeah, we've had tons of people coming to sponsor specific repos. Optimism in December, their most important initiative was their SuperSim repo, which is their interoperability testing suite. And so they sponsor it. We had tons of contributions to the Scout game for that repo. And so kind of, we built this game where people are rewarded for doing their work and people are rewarded for choosing good open source developers. But then there's this other part of it, which is like we can stimulate specific contributions with external capital. And so we never intended to build like a bounty system. We're like, oh, it's cool. We'll work with all the partners and they can sponsor the repos. But like it is kind of effectively working as a bounty system. And so there are a couple of bounty projects out there, but are different, but maybe we compete with them. There are some early experiments in using GitHub to give you POAPs. I think there's like a Git POAP project even. But I think now, of course, a lot of what we're doing is actually extremely similar to the next round of OP retro funding, because where Scout Game will go next is not just reward GitHub contributions, but you'll start to be able to like attach your smart contracts to them, and then we can reward your smart contract activity. And again, like a lot of these chains want to give retro funding to people who build smart contracts that actually get used. And so, OP's doing that all season long. They're just focused on both GitHub and on chain, but we're collaborators with them, so we're sharing things back and forth with them. But yeah, I don't think there's anyone who's quite kind of doing what we're doing. I think like you could maybe put us in the SocialFi space because you are buying NFTs of people. It's not quite the same as SocialFi. Like the stats are much more based on your work, not based on social. There's like a weekly payout because they're all a part of this game. But I think there is like a SocialFi element to this that makes me think of it as BuilderFi sometimes.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting sort of intersection of all these things that you just named: SocialFi, bounties, retroactive grants, whatnot. And
You know,
I'm not familiar with anything else like it. And it just doesn't sound like there is. There's pieces of it here and there, but it's sort of a unique blend that seems to be resonating strongly with builders. Like what's like sort of a, oversimplified stereotype of what's the kind of profile of the types of people who have been the most active in terms of like the builders in Scout Game?
yeah, I mean, I think there are two. There are just some of the like better known Farcaster builders, just like open source builders who signed up for the game. I mean, they're just scoring tons of points. It's like even like they may not even visit the game for 3 weeks, but they're just like there's some kind of top tier developers who are like just super productive. So there's like a lot of that, and then um, what has kind of been more interesting. So
And
you look at the
those,
leaderboard, you'll see a bunch of those names. Some of those people like work at Optimism or work at a high stable coin, or so it's a lot of like developers, who just develop professionally for a living, and their repos are in our game. So on top of what they get earned to work, they're like getting a bonus by playing the game. The second type is the one coming for the partner rewards, and yeah, it's like
bounty
my favorite
hunters.
story. Yeah, they're bounty hunters. They're bounty hunters, but it's kind of like, hey, I want to work on something. What should I work on? That's like one of the questions I get the most. I'm like, hey, cool, I'm pretty new. I want to work on something. What should I work on? And then I'll just send them to the partner rewards because I'm like, hey, one, because the partner rewards often have very organized repos with tags like beginner, like, oh, go check out this repo
Right.
and go find it. But also then they earn some additional money from it, and then some of them just get hooked on that, and then they become bounty hunters, and that's been super interesting. And then like particularly we have at least one developer who I DM with regularly who's like from Africa and basically says like I am making way more money playing the Scout Game than my developer job here in Africa. And so I think it's like truly a global game, right? And I'm excited about the parts of the world that we can start to bring on chain and get people paid and get people paid maybe a more fair price. Um, but it's just kind of like any open source developer who wants to play the game. And you don't even really have to engage in the community because the stats are there, and so the players will buy you up even if you're not. But some people, a lot of developers will then turn around and buy other developers and like be a part of the game. So you see them on the Scout leaderboard and you see them on the developer leaderboard. I think a lot of that for me has been like the Farcaster community.
Yeah, I was gonna say, or I was gonna ask rather, are the people who are buying like the builders, so to speak, mostly other builders, or is there like a separate? You sort of mentioned like two types of people who are mostly building. Is there like sort of a third group that is not really contributing and building, but they're buying the builders like tokens or whatever, or their points
Yeah,
or their
and
profile?
that's where most of the buying happens. Like you come in as a role as a scout, you don't even connect your GitHub, um, and then you're essentially buying the NFTs of the builders. And the NFTs themselves are on a linear bonding curve, so it pays to get in there early, and you buy people up, and then their prices go up over time. Um, but the prices, it's not like an NFT trading game, or like in a sense, it's not like SocialFi because it's not so much about like what can this value of the NFT be. It's a little bit more like, okay, how many points is this NFT going to score? And then like, what am I willing to pay for that? And then you can start to do the math around that.
Right. So it's truly based on the builder's earnings in the form of points.
Yeah, and like projected in the future. So yeah, totally. But then like when you're trying to make that decision, you're like, okay, there's six weeks left in this season. This card is $20. Like, is it going to earn enough points to be worth $20 for the remaining? Our weeks are 13. Our season's are 13 weeks. So like for the remaining 7 weeks, will this score enough points to be worth it?
Oh, I see. So the season will sort of reset and then everyone starts from scratch.
That's right. It resets, and then you buy all new cards, and the game rules change slightly.
Got it. That makes sense. And so most of these people who are scouting are not the same people who are building, but there is a little bit of overlap.
Yeah, there's overlap, but there's just a lot more scouts. But yeah, some of the builders play, and we certainly hope once we go on chain and you come and you do your claim and you get your tokens that you'll turn around and like play the game some more. Um, but yeah, there's like a much bigger pool of just players than there are developers. A lot of what we think about is like you could play FanDuel, and there's like only so many NFL players on the field, but millions of people are playing FanDuel. That's
Hmm.
kind of like our motto.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I could see that doing super well. Like I said, I think it's just like sort of at an interesting intersection of a bunch of these trends that are kind of working, but this sounds like it's putting them together in a way that is really compelling, and it sounds like people are really enjoying so far. Couple other things I just wanted to sort of cover, separately. Well, I guess first, before we move on from that, is there anything else on Scout Game that you think is important to mention, or we pretty much covered our bases there?
Yeah, no, that's pretty much it. Thanks for talking about it with me.
Yeah, no, of
We're
course. It's
we're
really,
we're gonna we're gonna launch. So we've been like in preseason. We're in preseason 2 now after preseason 1, because these are all. It's actually totally off chain, and most of the stuff is being handled on AWS. But we just passed all of our smart contract audits, and so pretty soon we're gonna like put this on as an entirely on chain protocol, and then we'll have a token alongside of it, and then that we will consider like season 1 is when it's entirely on chain.
yeah, that'll be exciting. It sounds like a important milestone for sure, and like pretty kind of inevitable given the area in which you're operating, that would be sort of like the next step.
Yeah.
So the other things I wanted to touch on, well, so first of all, I wanted to like sort of rewind on your story a little bit, on the Second Life piece, where like
Yeah.
it sort of sounds like at a certain point you had one foot in that world and another foot in your like sort of emergency response simulation job, and then you kind of made Second Life your first life, it sounds like, for a while. And like I've heard from like a number of people about this sort of like little, period in history that I feel like has sort of, I feel like it's kind of underrated, maybe. And I didn't participate in it, so I'm not like familiar from firsthand experience. But I'm curious, like whether that moment you mentioned with the TV show, like was that the biggest moment for the company you were working at, or was that also like maybe the biggest moment in like the Second Life sort of like hype cycle?
Yeah.
And more generally, just like what was that time like for you, and why do you think it took like, or has taken 15 plus years or whatever to like, why aren't there other shots on goal in this domain, given like sort of how much it blew up back then and how much better technology has gotten since then?
Yeah, so it was. I think that was kind of totally the crowning achievement of Second Life at that point when we were on CSI New York, and we were like in close coordination with Linden Labs, which is the team that made the software. So they had like extra capacity, extra server capacity ready for an onslaught of people, and so yeah, it totally was like a big thing. That whole like experience happened like very very quickly, but I'd say quickly over the course of 3 or 4 years, where it was like someone reached out to me and they were like, "Hey, can I pay you to build a Second Life thing?" To the next thing you know, we're like on television. Um, it was, yeah, it's like there's so much to say. First of all, it was like an amazing period in time for me. I was like late 20s. There were 3 companies at the level of the Electric Sheep Company. I was the creative director primarily, at first because I was the first. They were like, come work here. What do you want to do?" And I didn't really know. I was like, "I want to be the creative director." And like, "Great, come be the creative director." Which then, which turned me into a game designer over the course of a couple of years. Um, I was like flying all around the world at conferences talking about it because the hype was real. Like people, I mean, maybe it's like, there's been moments in like Ethereum history where it just seems like this thing is inevitable and it's going to take over the world. And every conference, whether it's, in those days, whether it was like a virtual worlds conference, which there weren't many, but it was like all these emerging tech conferences or media conferences or like, I don't know, even just these cool creativity things they would fly me out to speak. And so that was super fun. It was my first startup. So I learned basically everything you learn about a startup in that first one, along with being like the creative director. They just like always included me as the executive team. I was never quite a founder, but basically from day one I was in those rooms. So learned about everything. We went from Um, Actually, no, I think when I joined them, they had like raised $1 million, and then we had raised 10 while I was there. And so we went from 5 people to 150 people in less than a year, and experienced like all of the things that go wrong when that happens. Um, my God, so many things went wrong. And we were all so young in our 20s. And so, um, yeah, just like so much drama. Like, when you go from 5 people to 150 people, and then like half of them are women and half of them are men, there's like drama and everything. When you kind of go through that kind of rocket ship of a ride, and basically almost right up into that moment of CSI New York, where that night we had that was the first time we had like the oh no moment, because everyone around us was telling us like how great this stuff was and like how it was definitely going to be the future. So it really was like, I don't know, like a crazy sugar high. And then like we were acutely aware of what happened that night, and that this wasn't it wasn't like a thing we could like, oh, we'll just fix this thing. It was like, oh, we're never going to bring 1 million people on here. Yeah, you hear like a lot of like Jesse says 1 billion people on chain, and 1 million developers. Like, we actually don't have we don't have the crypto infrastructure to have 1 billion people on chain right now. So imagine they just all showed up today, and then we would be like, oh no, we're not ready. In fact, like Solana had its issues when Trump showed up, right? Or back in the day, Ethereum and CryptoKitties show up. So we wound up like having a bunch of capital to deploy at a moment when we realized like, oh my God, there's many years ahead. So yeah, and then we had to unwind the company, which is never fun. So it was like, I think it was like this period of intense excitement and fun. And like, my first startup, I'm young, and you do like the 100-hour weeks, which no one should really do, but you don't really know. So you're just working your ass off, and then it like hit a wall, and then it was a not that fun period, and then a soul searching period, and then figuring out what to do next.
And it's interesting because it's like one of these things that I feel like with people in crypto, a lot of people who have been in crypto for years, it's sort of felt inevitable the entire time, and maybe increasingly so even, as it continues to sort of grow roughly along a path that people sort of were expecting it to. And then people compare it most commonly, I think, to like, people who are early on the, with the internet in general are like, yeah, this is the exact same how like the internet felt. Even this might be even growing a little bit faster feeling. And like, I just knew from when I started doing things on the internet that this was the future, and like no doubt in my mind. And then, here we are, and people describe crypto the same way. Was Second Life something similar? And then you were
Yeah.
like sort of shocked when it didn't become what you expected, or was it not quite as, did it not feel like quite as confidently what the future was going to be,
Yeah,
as the internet or crypto?
yeah, totally. Like, well, I was writing a ton at the time, right? Like, I thought I knew everything. I was like on the cutting edge of virtual worlds. We were like winning awards and doing like these $1 million deals. And I like wrote a ton. I had a blog that was like popular. Like, the space was so small, so it was like popular in this small thing. And like when it all kind of came down, like I didn't write another blog post for like 10 years. I felt like, holy cow, I wrote all that stuff like I was an expert. I had no idea what I was talking about. So there was like certainly like still to this day that kind of soul, that understanding of like, when you're young and naive and you just think it's all going to work. And then you're like telling everyone it's going to work, and then it turns out it doesn't work. It's like a pretty humbling experience. The biggest difference is the space was really small. Crypto is really small, but virtual worlds was like even way smaller. And it was like, and we wound up getting these big budgets from all these companies who, again, it's ZERP time, so they're flush with cash, and they have these innovation teams, and they're just like spending money on everything. It wasn't like, it was rare that we had like someone actually strategic to one of these Fortune 500s in the room. So like the people we were dealing with were like at a slightly different level. It was all a little bit smaller. I think with crypto, like there's just so much co-signing. It's like at this point in the cycle where like BlackRock is into crypto, it's like there's so many more people saying this is going to be a thing. I also think like it's just, I think it's been obvious since the beginning, more obvious. And so what didn't work in virtual worlds? We were telling people that the web was going to become completely 3D. and that you wouldn't sit in front of 2D screens. By the way, the iPhone had not even come out yet. That you wouldn't be sitting in front of 2D screens and clicking around. You'd be like walking through spaces, and there are tons of benefits to that, and like memory. You can like remember things better when you're in a physical space.
Yep.
There's just a million different things. You like actually have empathy for people in the virtual world. Like and there's a lot of academic work around the outside. So like all this stuff is very real, but at the end of the day, it's like it's still kind of an inefficient way for a human to walk through the internet. And like 2D screens win, and then the mobile phone comes out and things have even more 2D. So that's kind of like our vision, which was like the internet is going 3D. Get on. That was just not. It was a much harder sell than like, hey, here's this cryptographic math that guarantees that this token is worth something. Like, now go figure out what to do with it. It was almost like the opposite, which was like we knew that everything was going to be in 3D, and you were going to like walk through the mall instead of shop on an e-commerce site. And so the vision was like more fundamentally flawed. I think that's one difference, and that's why it's like it is coming back. But how is it coming back now? I'll say two things. One, Fortnite Fortnite did it. So in one way, you can say like actually it totally is successful because Fortnite has all of the stuff we were trying back then. It has musicians who come in, it has events, it's programmed, it's like there's so much going on, you're an avatar, you dress yourself up, there's a million different game modes now. Anyone can create a game mode. And so to some extent, like it totally happened. Fortnite and Roblox built that version of virtual worlds. And then this next version is about wearables, which are super cool, but I'm just not super convinced people want to wear something. And so it might just be a form factor thing where things get down to, a contact lens or a pair of glasses or something is maybe the real hardware unlock we need here. I think this like whole space needs some major hardware unlock that makes it exciting and mainstream and better.
Is it surprising to you that there was never something that came along like, granted like Fortnite and Roblox, but there wasn't like sort of more of a, less game-like sort of more serious, if you will, like desktop sort of web experience as 3D? Because for all the points that you said, like, I've always really, since I've been involved with them here and there, I really enjoy these sort of like virtual world experiences like Mozilla Hubs or, there's sort of like other, that's probably been like the best one that I've experienced, but like there's others as well. Like I would just much rather, if I'm going to have a meeting with 5 people, I'd much rather do it in Hubs than in Zoom. Like it's just, for all the reasons you said, like it's actually easier to remember stuff. Like you can associate it with like a place in your head. It just works like sort of better for being sticky to your memory. And then I think that empathy point that you made is real. Like you're not going to be, not that you would necessarily do this over Zoom with people that but like the way that the internet works generally, like it's very easy for people to be like mean to other people because they're just sort of like a profile picture and a handle. But if you actually see like some like moving avatar, I feel like there's just a more natural inclination to like be civil. And I'm just kind of surprised that even though it wasn't huge, like there's been nothing since Second Life that has been like comparable, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think things moved hard into gaming, World of Warcraft, Roblox, and Fortnite. There were like these in between things like Habit Hotel, which are these kind of web based experiences. Like I mostly think, yeah. So one, it's like it was always a little surprising to me that nothing. Oh, that it was always surprising to me that like Second Life didn't come back. Like I would check in once a year. I would log in. I'd have my avatar, all the stuff in my inventory, but like it just never really got much better. Um, and then it feels like the defining moment was the next one would have been COVID, which is like when video chat took off, right? Like it's actually hard to think about how weird it was, video chat pre-COVID. And like you would never like raise from an investor via video chat. That would be like a crazy idea. And at that same time, the other thing that was similar was Clubhouse, right? Because now one thing about the virtual world is like you have voice and then you're talking to people, and then so like you said, your empathy, one, seeing their avatar, two, as soon as you hear someone's voice, people are typically a little bit more civil. And so we had like, they broke those experiences up, right? Like, okay, cool, now we can see each other on Zoom, or we can have fun in Clubhouse. And so, these ideas keep kicking around. We've seen some stuff around Farcast, they're doing the same. But yeah, I think, this is like definitely my sort of bias from where I came from, which is like the hardware is always a challenge. And unless you can do it on a phone, there's always like one person who can't join your meeting. And so that's like, maybe that'll be the thing, is like eventually the iPhone, either you have an iPhone or you have a Vision Pro and you can have the same experience either way. But it feels like we're like still a hardware breakthrough away from having that experience. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think some of the stuff that I mentioned was like mostly web. Like if you try to join a Mozilla Hubs from the phone, it's like pretty bad basically. But on the web, it's like great, at least in my opinion.
Like
So
like Zoom had their moment and they nailed it, right? Because like there were a million things that could have made Zoom not work, even in the pandemic. And it was like every little thing worked, it's like it just worked on everyone's computer, Linux, PC, Mac. Like it worked on people's phones. It was so easy to connect. And like if any one of those things was not smooth, might be living in like a totally different world right now.
yeah, we'd all be on like WebEx or something. I
Yeah.
remember that's what we would use when like in my job before COVID, we would like once in
Talk
a
to the
blue
other
moon,
office. Yeah.
you would do like a video chat like once like every, it was super rare. Conference calls though were not at all rare. Like conference calls were every day. And I always think it's kind of odd, and I don't really think it's right that, or like optimal that since that time where we flipped the in-person meetings to Zooms as like sort of the default, conference calls also kind of disappeared in favor of Zooms, because it's like, well, we're doing the in-person meetings on video. Why would we do like an audio only phone call? But I personally think that there's like, there's definitely, times where Zoom makes sense, but I think there's a ton of times where there's absolutely no need for a Zoom. Like, for example, if 8 out of 10 or 7 out of 10 people on a call are going to be like pretty passive, then it like doesn't really make much sense for them to have to like sit on a video and smile the whole time or whatever. Like just let them like plug in and listen in like passively, and have the main like players have their conversation or whatever. And I don't know, all these things, like we're doing this audio only right now. I just have like a large bias for audio only plus in person, where like the video chat has like a very narrow range in which it's more useful than either of those, and for me personally, but it's not like a common opinion.
Like
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
like completely have the same opinion. And in fact, like I'm still in front of my computer right now, but I'm standing.
Yeah,
It's like better
exactly.
for my energy, it's better for thinking, right? There's like lots of people who don't want to go on walking meetings. But like when I think about, I haven't gone back to an office after COVID. I just work remotely and living kind of the remote crypto nomad life here in Honduras. And like when I think about like I used to be in an office. Like we were on WeWork, we were Startup Studio. It was super cool. We would have our meetings. We were sitting at a table, but like it was totally appropriate for me to like stand up and encourage to like go to the whiteboard, or even if I wasn't going to
Yeah.
the whiteboard, just like walk around the room a little bit. We lose. I always feel like chained to the desk with video chat. Like we lose a lot of that like energy you can burn off, and I think helps like spur new ideas.
Yeah, and I think there's just like a lot of wasted effort and energy spent on like trying to look at this camera at the top of your thing, and like rather than actually listening and like doing what you need to
Mm.
do, whether it's pace the room or whatever, to like actually process what's being said and listen and think and respond thoughtfully, like whatever. It's just like so much wasted energy on like, all this BS type stuff. But last thing, I know, I think I already said last question, but I have one more now. You mentioned you're in Honduras. How did that come about?
Yeah, so my wife is Honduran, so we met in New York. She was working as a diplomat in New York City, and then through the pandemic, we left New York and lived in Miami for a few years together, and then we had some kids, and then her family is all down here in Tegucigalpa, Honduras. Charmverse, which is still the company building Scout Game, but we've always been completely remote. Our team is all over the world, and so I just sort of felt like maybe this is my one time period where we can come live down here while our kids are super young. So now they know grandma and grandpa, and then probably we'll move back to the States when it's time for them to go to school. And
Yeah.
at the moment it felt like I don't know if this opportunity will ever present itself again. So let's do this now. And then now I just feel like if I want to, I can work remotely from anywhere in the world for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
But love the United States, have plans on going back. But yeah, just took this opportunity to be around some family down here.
Are you familiar with, or have you visited by any chance Prospera down there?
Right. So I'm super familiar with it, and I track it every day. What's happening in Prospera
Is it
and Richmond.
nearby?
It's like it's not nearby, so I have to
Okay.
take an air. It's like an hour airplane, so
Oh wow.
the country's pretty small. But yeah, it's a Prospera is an island off the coast of Honduras, and it's beautiful. I've not visited Prospera, but I have been to that island many times, which is called the Roatan, and
Yeah.
it's truly like the most beautiful place I've ever been. It's totally paradise. And so, yeah, I get like the recruitment DMs from the Prospera team uh, every kind of cycle. And I'm super tempted and I really want to do it. But it's like not near my family, which is the reason why we're down here. And so, and you
Yeah.
sort of have to commit to like many months. So I literally was talking to my wife this morning, like, hey, do you think we'll ever live in Prospera? And then we were kind of talking through some of the logistics. So it's something I want to do that I think I probably will not do just due to just trying to live down here as a family.
Yeah, I wonder if there's some kind of in between where maybe like you could spend like one season a year over there or something, at least like before your kids are in school,
Yeah,
where like it's not, 9 months or 10 months of the year where you are now, but then you're close enough that it's easy to just like scoot over there. But I don't know, it is one of those things where it's like, given that you're an hour plane ride away, like it's actually not that much easier to like justify time in Prospera for you versus
yeah,
like someone in
totally.
Miami or something. Like it seems like it should be a lot easier because you're in the same country, but
Right,
it's
right.
like kind of the same
It's the same
friction in
thing.
between.
Yeah.
Um,
I will say that like I'm a believer and I want it to succeed and I can imagine living there. Like for the network state components of it that I really believe in. But then like the realities of these early network states wind up being one, Prospera is very like on the island of Roatan is very, very small. So, I have young kids. I can't imagine how many kids are even on that island. It's like a very small number. And then also like a lot of these network state kind of things, and they try to make it family friendly and they do the best they can. But there is a lot of like single guys.
yeah,
So it's not like something like daycare or first grade. It's not like a slam dunk for a lot of network states.
right.
Um, so,
Yeah, I
but
think
yeah,
solving
totally.
sort of the gender issue is like a top order priority for these sorts of projects that should be sort of addressed pretty much from day one because it's kind of hard if you have a community of 1,000 or 10,000 with 90% guys in their 20s and 30s. Like it's kind of hard to reverse, to fix that at that point. Like you kind of need to seed it in a way that it's building in a way that's kind of family friendly. Unless obviously that doesn't have to be the intention, but even if the intention is to make it something that's mostly focused on 20 or 30-year-old guys, those guys are going to grow up. Like a lot of them are going to want to have families, and then they're going to have to choose to either grow out of that community, which could be fine. It could be like sort of a period of life sort of place, but if you want it to be like at all sort of persistent with the same community, you need to sort of solve the family problem basically. So it'll be
Yeah,
interesting to
maybe
see
there's
what
some
happens with
world
all
where
that.
there's like yeah, the location matters so much, and when like Prospera like truly is like I could live my entire life on the beach there and drink coconut milk, and it's totally paradise. But it's like you can imagine a place that's like adjacent to something with more infrastructure, and so it's like okay, my kid goes to daycare outside the network state, but I
Right.
do most of my operations inside. Maybe that's another way to do it.
Yeah, not as isolated and remote. And is it pretty safe on Roatan?
It's extremely safe, extremely safe.
Extremely safe.
Yeah,
That doesn't
so
go for the rest of the country though. There's dangerous parts, right?
yeah, Honduras doesn't have a great reputation, and yeah, you gotta like know where you're going. I mean, from pure statistics, or if you go to the U.S. State Department site, it's like they tell you not to come here.
Right.
Um,
But Roatan is like removed
Roatan,
enough that it's different.
so different, and what Roatan is really famous for is that it's on one of the three best reefs in the world, and so there's a really thriving uh, scuba tourism culture down there, and as a result, it's beautiful, everything's nice, it's super safe. It's like they police themselves kind of, but yeah, it's like it's thriving there.
Cool. Well, that's an interesting little tangent we were able to go on. I
Yeah,
had
cool.
the founder on my other podcasts probably, I don't know, a year or two ago, but I've always respected and admired him. And it's
Such
funny,
a
like
cool project.
there's this really old podcasts that it was like an in-person recording of a podcast between Tyler Cohen and Peter Thiel, and I'm blanking on the name of the founder. Do you recall?
No, there are two founders, but no.
Prospera. Man, it'll come to me. It's kind of, I definitely should know this. But that's what happens. You record too many podcasts. You not only can't you even remember all the conversations, you can't even remember everyone's name. But
Well,
I should definitely know.
you should record them in a virtual world, and then you'll remember.
Exactly. Then I'll remember everything. So anyway, I think it'll come to me. But he gets up. He's at this podcast, and then he gets up. There's like a Q&A after, which made it into the podcast recording, which I was listening to like 10 years later, a few years ago. This is like an old recording. I want to say like maybe 2013 or 2015 or something like that. And he gets up after, and he's like, I'm like working on a new way to like build a new country, and would like to know like what you would need to see to like fund something like that. And you could just tell by the way that he was saying it that he was like so determined to do this. And at the time it wasn't Prospera, it was like a different project he was working on before that. And it's just so cool to see years later, like he's got the land, he's got a lot of the sovereignty, like in agreements with the government, he's got people, he's got like a lot of it has actually happened. And again, after this previous project he did, which I'm not sure what happened with that, but like that's, real persistence over 10, 12, whatever years it's been. And it's still obviously extremely early, but for a project so ambitious, that's like, a lifetime mission basically. So it's been really cool to see that. And I'm definitely rooting for them from afar. And I would like to visit myself actually, just for like, a week or whatever it is, just to check it out.
What they do is they have like certain events over like a 3-day weekend or something. So if you find one of those you like, and then they just get like Brian Armstrong was down here recently talking. They get like the best people to come talk at their events, and I think their events are pretty small, so you get to like actually have some intimate time with some of these people.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's an interesting group of people that are into like this concept of building new cities or network states or whatever it might be. And I don't know, like when I started my other podcast, my sort of like 3 topics that I thought I would start with talking to people like in those spaces was crypto, obviously, and then it was longevity, like specifically, the idea that like less of the Brian Johnson stuff, to be honest, and like the sort of like fitness trackers and stuff, and more of like the can we actually like the science that people are doing to figure out like, are there ways that we can slow and reverse aging itself, like targeting aging as opposed to diseases? I've always thought was like super interesting. So that was like another leg of the podcast. And then the third was city building. I hadn't really thought much about like country building at that time, but ultimately country building sort of became part of it as well. But yeah, these 3 things have always been like super interesting to me. And obviously there's more that have come about over the years, but anyway, yeah, Eric Bremen is the founder of that's who I was thinking of. So of Prospera. So anyway, I know we've gone way over the scheduled time, but it's been awesome getting to talk about everything from Scout Game to building countries, and a little bit of Second Life in between and whatnot. So super cool story, and great to connect. Outside of just little casts in the feed, it's always good to get the long form version. So great conversation. Appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, awesome, man. It was great to talk to you. Thanks for having me.